Hey, friends. Good day, good day. Thanks everybody for joining in. Looks like we got an awesome group of people here and people are still flowing in. I'm going to give it another 20 to 25 seconds as people are jumping in, and then we'll go ahead and dive into our conversation today. I also will be tracking the chat, but I'd prefer if questions came in through the Q&A just so I can help answer those in time. I see a lot of friendly names and people that we know. And then welcome to the new friends that we're making in as well. We're open to Q&A at the end as well. So if you want to raise your hands or chat during the second half of this, absolutely happy to do so. Excited to jump in with everybody. We're going to do a quick overview of the STRATFI TACFI program. I'll go over sort of all the different pieces. AFWorks and AFVentures have also done a fantastic webinar on this content as well. So happy to dive in. We'll go over that and we'll go over some winning strategies and also weave that throughout the conversation we're going to have here today. Please feel free to use the Q&A, and I'm excited to dive in and get started. I'm Joey, one of the managing partners here on the Outpost side. Our mission is to help companies grow and scale in the DoD space, and deeply passionate about helping companies grow. And today we're going to focus our webinar on the strategic financing and tactical financing process, and then discuss some winning strategies for that side as well. And yes, Anthony, I will provide the slides when we are done. So we will take care of that and make sure they're sent out to everybody here. All right. So what are the strategic financing and tactical financing programs? They are programs to help companies that are on an Air Force Phase 2 SBIR or STTR award transition to programs of record. Now, this program was built, we built it when I was in the Air Force specifically so that companies that could transition that valley of death for program executive office funding, so that those PEOs that are out there are the real owners of the requirements and the funding. They put all that together and help execute long-term sustainability and new capabilities for the military. And that's where a lot of our major acquisitions are run out of. And so when you're looking at how you transition a capability in the Department of Defense, this is a pathway where their out-year budget requests can now be a little bit more flexible, and you can bring in additional sources of money or revenue to help augment the already decided funding process for the next couple of years, allowing them to pivot and move a little bit faster in adopting new capabilities. So it's a great opportunity to say, how do we build the right relationships with program offices? How do we build relationships with senior level stakeholders, and dive into what those programs are going to do long term. So I'll dive in a little bit later into who are those program offices and how do you get engaged with them and what does that look like. So how are you eligible for a STRATFI? So the application window is 6 September to 27 September. You need to be on an active Phase 2 Air Force award within the last 2 years, and that's calculated from your award date. And you need to not have already awarded a sequential Phase 2. So if you have a TACFI, that might qualify for you. And we can have a further discussion and have to look at some of your contracting documents to understand and answer that. And then you need to have at least 90 days that have passed since your Phase 2 was awarded. Again, that's your award date that's on the contract. There's also a lot of application pieces that go in. So you need to have an end user agreement and a collaboration agreement as well. And those are run by specific templates that AFWorks has provided. The STRATFI timeline, again, it is 6 September to 27 September this year. There's no specific requirement on who on the government side has to submit the application, but it is required to be done by government. It is using an AppWorks-specific system, using likely called AppSheet, that will go live on 6 September. They did make a save function, which is awesome for this year's round. And the important piece about this submission timeline is those government stakeholders are going to have to be involved in the contracting letters, the financial letters, and then also submission here. And one thing to check with your government stakeholders once the applications go live is if they have access to it from their government networks. Sometimes Google products don't have clean access on the NIPRNet, so it's something you want to check. And another key thing to note for your government stakeholders, there are government-only calls on this that are run by AFRIX for you government stakeholders to engage with government. And then Raj, these dates are for 2023. So this is September 6th to September 27th, 2023. So the window is very short. It is August 30th. So we are 28 days away from submission for STRATFI. All right, next up, how we've helped companies, a little bit about the Outpost side. We've helped over 200 companies engage in the DoD space. We've helped them win over 367 million in awards, and we have an 87% success rate across STRATFI and TACFI submissions. So you might be wondering, hey, what are the application requirements for the STRATFI process? You need to have basic information about your company. What are you doing? How are you taking your phase 2 effort and really scaling it out with the Department of the Air Force? That can be Space Force, that can be Air Force side, but how are you answering what are you taking from your original prototype capability, and how are you really delivering a game-changing engagement for the warfighter? And the other thing you have to think about is, what is that extension from your phase 2? What is the continued research and development that happens? As you're getting the research and development dollars as a part of the STRATFI process, how does that fit into your product roadmap and timeline there? And you're going to also want to talk about the STRATFI TACFI effort. So you need to go in depth on how this capability is changing, what are the technical aspects of the development, what your plan is for commercialization with these dollars. You have to remember that the overarching goal of the SBIR and STTR program is to help companies develop technology that is going to grow and scale in the commercial world as well. So a big part of the STRATFI application is looking at the dual use side. So when you're talking about the narrative in your application here, a key winning strategy is to discuss what are the dual use implications of your capability, how are you growing in the commercial market, and how are you growing in the private market? In the public market as well. So what are you doing to grow inside of government? What are you doing to grow inside of the commercial space? Other documents to be aware of is you need to have your spend plan and your milestones. So really break down which milestones are going to be using what types of funding as well. If you're getting a mix of R&D funding through the SBIR process, but you're bringing government matching dollars to the table, what of those government dollars that are brought in as matching funding are being spent on which milestones? Do you have O&M money? Do you have other colors of money? How are you breaking out your milestones for what you're actually accomplishing and making sure that money is lined up correctly? So that's a key part of making sure that your application is qualified and that you are going to have a successful completion of the application. The other key thing is those matching funding letters on both the private side and on the government side. For STRATFI specifically, since that's what we're focused on, this is a 4-year window that STRATFI is available for you to apply to. So you can have a period of performance of 48 months. You don't have to apply for all 48 months. A lot of people think, hey, we have to do this over a 4-year time period. That's not required. If you can deliver a capability and you can use STRATFI funding to accelerate the development of your capability, then that you could do it in 24 months. You have the opportunity to go up to 48. And you have to have the private funding that comes in if you're doing a dual use STRATFI. That needs to come in as your government dollars are coming in. So if you have funding letters for the next 24 months, You need to be able to specifically identify where that money is coming from, who you're going to go to, and those letters of commitment from either advanced purchase orders or venture capital firms, or debt equity financing is an option in there, but we have to get more into specifics around matching funds for some of those pieces. So the other thing that you want to think about for these letters is you need to know where that money's coming from for the next 24 months. So a key thing to think about is you might not have all 15 or all $30 million if you're doing a maxed out STRATFI of funding identified. You might be able to say, I know we're going to have 15 million over the next 24 months. And then you can say, hey, these are the organizations we're going to go to in years 3 and 4 for funding. So now here's a unique opportunity to say, hey, we've lined up the initial set of funding and we know in 2 years from now, we'll need to raise an additional $15 million. And that will be checked during the contract execution process. So it will need to be validated later in the contract execution, but it is a pathway to say, hey, you've identified funding opportunities today, you've gotten some money in, and you could do a portion of that in the first 24 months and then raise the rest in the remaining. So you could even do the first 7 million, let's say, in the first 18 months, and then go after a larger raise later. All right. So what are your matching fund options, right? We're going to focus here on the STRATFI side. So we have STRATFI. The opportunities for STRATFI are anywhere from a minimum $3 million up to a max of $15 million. So you have the defense-only STRATFI, where you're getting 1 part SBIR dollars and 2 parts government dollars. So if the minimum here is $3 million, that the numbers break out to, this is a $3 million of SBIR funds. You need to bring $6 million of government customer money to the table. This doesn't have to all be in day one. You don't need to already have that on contract. You can say how that's going to happen over the next 4 years. And similar to some of the private funding options, you can get the government can't commit future year budget, but they can commit, hey, there's a letter of intent and that government funding letter that comes to the table to help answer some of that. So let's jump over to the dual use side now for STRATFI. There's an option to bring 1 part SBIR funds, STTR funds, 1 part government dollars, and 2 parts private. Let's say you were trying to max out on this side. That would be $15 million of R&D funding through SBIR, STTR. Then it would be $15 million of government customer funding. So this needs to be that stakeholder program office that you're working with. And then it would be $30 million of private funding. So if you're looking at what your options are for your STRATFI program, you really need to take a look at and understand what government stakeholder money do you have? What is the timeline on that stakeholder money? Are you a company that is raising funds? Or are you not raising funds? There have been multiple companies who have been successful in pursuing the defense-only STRATFI and not raising commercial funds, venture funds, or advance orders. It is entirely possible. This program was designed to help companies transition to programs of record. It is not only a requirement to get venture capital. I also see a question here from Anonymous. If you get a TACFI first, are you prohibited from getting a STRATFI? The answer is no, but there's specific nuances around how your contract was awarded for your TACFI that may or may not make you eligible for STRATFI this year. And that is if it was a sequential phase 2 award based off of your phase 2. And James, you asked, hey, are government funds from a singular entity, or can it be from multiple government entities? It can definitely be from multiple entities. All right, and I see a couple other questions. I will get to those as we're going through some of this as well. So some mistakes that people make during this application process. The application has a lot of varying pieces. You need to make sure that you have submitted every one of the 14 different documents that are part of this process. You need to make sure that your funds are matching. So we talked about this a little bit earlier, that you have the right type of funds matching up with the right type of milestones, and you have the timelines that match up, that those funds are eligible for the timeline that STRATFI is, and your funds are, your submission date is within, for example, 6 months for your last phase 3 award dollars. Your phase 3 dollars only count from the last 6 months here. So that type of thing is something you really need to dive into and make sure you're submitting by the right date so your information matches. Also, inaccurate phase 2 contract number. This one sounds pretty simple, but it's a really important thing here to know that the phase 2 that you're building your STRATFI off of, what is that contract number, and making sure it's correctly in your submission documents across all of them. And that ties into point 7 here, document integrity. There's a lot of different moving pieces, a lot of conversations that are happening. Make sure that you have alignment across all of your documents and are triple and quadruple checking that the information is correct across the board. Another major part of this, and part of being a successful engagement along STRATFI, is who is that contracting office and who's that finance office at that execution level that is going to be involved in this process. To have a successful STRATFI, you need to be actively engaged with those program offices and with your end customer who are going to actually put this on contract. And that those finance and contracting offices need to be signing the memos and agreeing, saying, hey, we're going to do this. And that is so that when this contract is selected for award, that money is going to get sent to that local contracting office and finance office for execution. So they need to be actively involved with the process, understand what's happening beyond just a signature on the memo. You need to be talking to them. They need to understand how this is a priority with the rest of the things that they have going on. If we are submitting STRATFI in September, you can expect anywhere from a 3 to 6 month review window. And then the requirement is that these contract offices are getting it on contract within 90 days. You want to make sure that they have the bandwidth and the timeline to prioritize this, and they understand how this fits into their commander's intent of all the other things that are going on for the mission. And the last thing we'll cover on the common mistake side is look for program year 24 in all the document headers. Act Ventures released updated document versions. Make sure you're pulling from the latest Google Drive links. And if you're pointing your government personnel to this, there's a Teams link available as well for all of these documents. So let's talk a little bit more about how do you win a STRATFI. The number one thing you want to have is deep engagement with a program office and executive sponsor. You want to really understand who your executive sponsor is. What do they care about? They have a set budget for this year and next year already. What are their trade-offs in terms of capabilities? How is what you're bringing to the table having an impact on the warfighter mission? How are you doing this in a data-driven way that the capability that you're bringing to the table through your phase 2, have you shown how you're more effective, how you're safer? How do you make sure that we can generate mission capabilities faster? How do we put warheads on target faster? Like if you're a space situational awareness company, how are you identifying who are those right stakeholders? And how are you targeting folks within it's 20% faster than the previous methodology? And can you show how that has an outcome on the battlefield? Those are the types of questions you need to be able to specifically answer with your stakeholder. And at this point, when we're 28 days away from STRATFI submission, you need to be actively engaged with the senior level stakeholders, the program offices, and their deputies to talk about this capability and make sure they're bought off and they're engaged in that process. And in addition to that, you need to know who's responsible for execution within that organization. Just because you have someone that says, hey, yep, our PEO will sign it, do you have the actual folks that are going to staff that document? Who is going to submit it for signature? Are they tracking that it needs to be signed and returned to the stakeholder before the submission deadline on the 27th so they have time to submit it? Those are some of the things you have to work through to make sure you have a successful package here as well. And you also want to be clear about your timelines for delivery. This is still research and development work. So what is your timeline for bringing capability to the fight? There's a strong push inside the military to make sure we're ready for the Indo-PACOM fight by 2027, so that we're ready to fight and win and ideally deter in the military. So how do you line up with that engagement? What is your narrative that you're telling that enables our capabilities be more effective in that timeline. A key piece of this is also understanding how the money works. You need to understand how the Air Force is going through the budgeting process. This will be a webinar we do at a separate time, and we'll bring in some folks who are experts on the funding side. But you want to know what the different colors of money are, how that lines up with your STRATFI effort, what budget are people setting aside, what program element is it tied to, and how much are they setting aside for fiscal year 24, 25, 26, and 27. Those are the 4 years you're going to get for this year's STRATFI application. And how do we know that that money is lined up? One risk to consider is that there's a likely potential that the government's going to go on a continuing resolution. So when are those fiscal year 24 dollars actually going to be available? And how do you make sure that the money that is fenced off for your capability is set aside? So if we have a long CR, that the money doesn't get shuffled around when the budget fully does flow down. So those are things to consider as you're looking at the budget. The other thing to think about is, how is your capability lined up with the operational imperatives? There's a large push inside the Air Force to align all of our efforts against the operational imperative side of the house. And that is, how do we make sure that the money that we're spending is lined up with the capabilities that the Air Force needs to be successful? So if you're bringing a space situational awareness capability, that's going to line up here with operational imperative 1, the space order of battle. And how are you tying that narrative in place? Who are the stakeholders that are relevant for this? How are you changing the nature of the fight? These are the questions you have to answer, and you have to answer it on the cost side as well. The military budget, while it's extremely large, is still looking for efficiencies and making sure we're bringing the best of breed dual use tech in place. And that's important to look at for how you're engaging in the military side. So line up your capability, one of these operational imperatives, tie that in here with a program office, make sure you're having the data speak for itself and you have the budget lined up. Those are some key strategies on making sure you're winning on the STRATFI side. So Anonymous, you asked, hey, who's a program of record? And what is that? So there's Air Force Program Executive Offices. These are the organizations that are responsible for delivering capability for the Air Force. So I have a list of them here. We put all of them on this slide, so this way it's in one place. This will be sent out so you can take a look at that. You need to make sure that you're talking to one of these and engage with them. And that is that transition to that program of record. These are the ones that are responsible for the long-term funding of these areas. And then there's also an opportunity to go to the centers. This is an Air Force center at the headquarters Air Force level or AFMC level, where you can go to these organizations and they're responsible for specific capabilities that might not fit in within one of the program executive offices. So those are the 2 sets of organizations you want to go to engage with who can be your signing stakeholders for your customer memorandum. So we also want to cover real quick the FY22 STRATFI TACFI results. So there were 147 capability packages submitted last year, 22 were returned and ineligible. Then there were 22 out of 25 STRATFIs were picked, and 67 out of 100 TACFIs were picked. So we've now separated the STRATFI TACFI submission window this year, so just focus along STRATFI. I expect that with a shorter time period, that's going to be really difficult for a lot of organizations to submit a complete STRATFI package. And we'll find some of those are deemed ineligible because the short timeline and the challenges in getting signatures. So that's something you really need to consider as you're going after this, is do you have the right pieces in place for this to be effective? I'm going to skip over the review process so I can deep dive into some of these questions. And then we're here on the Outpost side to help you get stuff done. So if you're looking at pursuing STRATFI or you're looking at how you bridge the funding to a program of record, we're here to help. And I'm happy to dive into some of that as we go through the rest of this conversation. All right, I'm going to jump into some Q&A here and help answer some of these questions. Anthony, can a TACFI be a mix of private and government funding? So TACFI is very specifically laid out as you can either do defense only or dual use. So it can't be like part government, part dual use here. It needs to be one or the other. Rod, you said for 2024, will it be September, or is there an earlier date since we've not completed 90 days for the 2023 September date? App Ventures does not know what the submission window is for STRATFI for 2024. That is, I bet they will see the outcomes of this STRATFI round, and then they'll make that determination on what they're doing next year. We'll see how many packages get submitted in a short time frame. The TACFI dates have not been released yet. All right, Anonymous, you asked, can you clarify what a program of record is and how it differs from a phase 3? What kind of contract qualifies as a program of record? Does a basic ordering agreement? So a phase 3 is a title for what you call a contract after you've gotten other government money that is not SBIR, STTR dollars. And it is a derivative of your phase 1 or phase 2 work. So a phase 3 is actually just a name for saying, hey, we got a contract that is a follow-on from our phase 1 or phase 2 work that is done by another government, funded by another government organization. It could be anywhere in the US government and federal level, and that's what counts as a phase 3. A program of record is something that has long-term funding, is funded by a program executive office. It has line items against a requirement and funding lines in the budget for it. And then does a basic ordering agreement contract qualify for a program of record? It depends on where that BOA is, and it depends on where that particular organization is. If you want to dive into this a little bit later and on a one-on-one basis, happy to do so. I don't know who you are, so it's hard for me to follow up with a specific engagement there. All right, we got another question from Anonymous. Are there any risks or implications if you submit towards the end of the submission window, closer to September 27th? The current stated requirements and evaluation process for this year do not state that there are any negative implications for that. I think your risk is in making sure that the documents are submitted in time and that you get the signatures back and the government POC is actually able to submit it. All right, based on our experience with doing this in years past, what are we doing differently to help our clients from this year? So our focus is in really making sure that the program offices and the executive sponsors are aligned with where this capability is being deployed. We're also doing a cleaner alignment of how funding is lined up for our companies and making sure that the money that is set up for company engagement in 24, 25, 26, 27 is clearly laid out, and that those contracts will happen regardless of if the company gets selected for a STRATFI. And if they do get selected for a STRATFI, that those milestones are separated and people know that, hey, this is the additional work that will happen if a company is picked up for a STRATFI. Bernard, you asked, hey, what are our fees? We do a retainer plus success fee model, and I'm happy to chat with you about that, and we'll follow up one-on-one about that as well. Anonymous, yeah, you brought out, hey, here's additional program offices. Thanks a ton for sharing the additional Space Force program offices. I will take that and make sure we add it. I really appreciate that. Anonymous, if a 15-15, $30 million dual STRATFI is submitted and AFWERX doesn't want to commit 15 million, will they contact the proposing company to negotiate a lower amount or just not select? They will just not select. There's not a negotiation process around the STRATFI amounts. So you have to make sure that there is a strategic need for this capability, especially for these larger amounts of funding. And that's where you tie into the program offices and executive sponsors. And so if you are worried about that, I would say that take a look at the narrative for your application and see what can we do for those pieces. Amanda, is there a chance they won't do a TACFI for submission this fall? That is always a chance that the team at Ventures has not publicly made their decision known for what the timeline for that is. The indications are that they're likely to do a TACFI submission window post this STRATFI window. Brian, can a COCOM like US Indo-PACOM be a joint program off SPM to act as a customer if there's an Air Force end user? So in the documents, it is not called out that the COCOM can be a customer, but that is a question that we've asked and engaged, and we're going to lean forward saying yes, a COCOM can. If I were you, Brian, I would send that question specifically to AFWERX and go into the specifics of, hey, here is our government customer. Here is why they're a COCOM. Here are our stakeholders. Can you please validate, hey, this is okay? So you have that in writing. And then the other thing I would do is have your stakeholders at US Indo-PACOM go join the Gov to Gov call. We're also happy to help you get that answer over from them. We've done it for a few of our companies as well. All right. Do nearly expended phase 2 awards count towards SBIR total? The answer is no. Eleanor, thanks for the kind words. And thanks to getting the additional program offices. Shout out to Anonymous for who gave that. How many STRATFI does AFWERX plan to award? I think the answer is TBD based off of the number of submissions. 20% of the budget is set aside for STRATFI TACFI programming, and with a $1.2 billion budget for the SBIR STTR program, that's $220 million set aside for program year 24. And I think they're going to have additional funds because SBIR STTR money is 2-year money, and there's such a long gap between the last submission cycle and this one. I bet some of that budget is still set aside. All right. Michael, if you're already part of a program of record, does that limit your ability to be involved with TACFI, STRATFI? The answer is no. That is actually a huge advantage for you, because if you're a part of that program of record, then they can be your stakeholders as transition and part of TACFI, STRATFI. You need to be able to justify what that additional R&D funding is going to get and how that will transition there. So that's something you want to talk about, and how this is actually helping you transition that capability and further commercialize your capability. Amanda, thanks for the kind words. Anonymous, are you saying that a small business, we can promise that the Air Force that we are going to generate 30 million of sales in the next 4 years? Will they believe projections, or do we need to show that there's a contract lined up for the future years? Specifically in the matching funds guidance, it states that there need to be advanced pre-orders, which is an exchange of cash for the either future version of a product or equity. So, and there's a couple other opportunities in there, but you cannot just promise that the Air Force you're going to generate 30 million of sales. You need to have signed letters of commitment and an exchange of cash. All right, Andrew Lee. Do you find companies being more successful seeking VC dollars or first securing government intent when applying for dual use? Anything we as government can do to help in the process? So a lot of VCs are going to look to say, hey, where is your government traction? Having a phase 2 is not fully government traction. It's those follow-on contracts that are really important. It's the follow-on funding that's really important, because there's a lot of opportunity to get phase 2 prototype dollars. As a VC firm, it's really important to look at how's that actually going to translate into annual recurring revenue. What is the capability? What is the moat that this company is bringing to the table? Have they actually fenced off any development dollars in this process? That's something to take a look at here. And then anything you can do on the government side to help the process. Yes, be as transparent as possible about getting stakeholder support on both the end user and customer side. If you have a capability that you really want to help scale within an organization, make sure your chain of command is involved and engaged in this process. You need to have a GS-15 and or an 06 be a signatory on the end user side. And then you need to have the deputy program office or the senior leadership, the lead for the program office, be the signers on the documents for STRATFI. So you want to make sure that you have a pathway there to communicate the outcomes and impact of a program pursuing STRATFI, and have an open line of communication to get these documents done. All right. Matthew Riggs, what are the factors that guide companies into applying through TACFI versus STRATFI? Is a TACFI company usually more in early stages than the main? Is that the main determinant? And then can the company start through TACFI and then apply later through STRATFI? Yes to your second question. You have to make sure that you don't do the sequential phase 2 as part of your TACFI, so then you can pursue a STRATFI and or have a separate phase 2 you can pursue with. And then the difference is often the amount of money that companies can raise and or amount of money companies have from their government stakeholders to transition a program. So some companies cannot get to that minimum $6 million or $3 million threshold, and they choose to pursue TACFI as a result of that. Anonymous, how does the government / AFWERX track the use of private sector fund matching portion for the R&D project? So they're not specifically tracking exactly how that money is spent. The contracting office is responsible for making sure that the funds were received at the company level so that they can then release the R&D dollars and government dollars as part of the matching funds process. They can get a little bit more nuance there, and I'm happy to chat about that more specifically. All right, we went over time by 6 minutes, but we have answered all of the questions. If anyone has anything else, please feel free to jump in and ask in Q&A or type something in chat, or feel free to raise your hand and we can chat as well. Thanks, Anthony. Thanks, Tim. And thanks, Anonymous, for the kind words. Thanks, Rachel. All right, everyone. I hope you have a good day. Thanks for making the time. Stick around if you have a question or want to chat one-on-one. Hey, Matt, I see you raised your hand. Let me allow you to talk. Thanks, Mike Brown. Thanks, Anonymous. Thanks, Anonymous. And it looks like Matt's gone, but if we still have like 17 attendees, if you're still here listening in because you want to chat, please feel free to jump in. Thank you, Sonia. Amanda, you did ask a question and you're still here. All right. If we're a better fit for TACFI but want to try to stretch for STRATFI and don't get selected, can we still apply for TACFI if that opens up? Yes, but AFWERX has hinted at that those windows will overlap potentially. So you won't know for your STRATFI submission if you get a yes or no during the TACFI window is what they've hinted at. So if you submit for STRATFI, it's unlikely you'll be able to also apply for TACFI this year. I would make a judgment call based off of your government customer engagement and support. What are they most interested in jumping into and being able to work with you on? And feel free to jump in if you want to chat. Matt, thanks for jumping in, good sir. I think you're unmuted.
All right, man. Hey, thanks, Joey, for putting this on. It was awesome as always. Question I have is around anticipated government matching funds. So a lot of our phase 2s with Insight Bespin have IDIQs tied to them, and we're in the process of raising those ceilings of the phase 3 IDIQs to $100 million because of the success of the $10 million ceilings that we've had. My question is, how do you narrate that story for anticipated matching funds, knowing that we're projecting in the out years, $10 to $15 million of like external customers using that phase 3, which potentially could, count towards matching funds for anticipated funds. So I hope I'm asking that question correctly, trying to, figure out the best story to tell there.
Yep. So if you take a look at the government funding letter says, hey, here's the type of funding that's going to be included in our base year, option year 1, 2, and 3. So if you have $100 million IDIQ set up for some of these companies, what I would do is specifically line up and say, here's the money on, we're putting $1 million in for base year, and then we're going to do $4 million year one, $6 million year two, and then, that remaining out of the 15 in year three. So that's $4 million there in year three. But like, be realistic about what you're putting into that base year. AFWorks recognizes that you don't actually have that money on contract yet. But because this will be pushed back to your contracting office for execution, your contracting office is going to be the one that's responsible for tracking which of those did that funding actually get on contract, right? So your contract office is the one that is responsible for that execution. So they're going to be the ones to say, yes, we put $4 million, or we'll make this easy. We put $5 million on contract in year one. And so we can release $5 million of the STRATFI SBIR funding. And then year two is the next 5 million. Let's say you only got $4 million authorized. Then you could shuffle that around and say, now you can only release $4 million out of the 5 million that we had originally planned. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. So good news is we have good discipline in our contracting shop, so that shouldn't be a problem. I just wanted to make sure that that story is not going to be like, well, why do you need a STRATFI if you already have these IDIQs?
And that's where you need to come in and say, here's how this is going to accelerate the deployment or the capability commercialization, right? Because you have to remember the intent to STRATFI is to help with the transition. And $100 million IDIQ ceiling is different than saying we have the money to fund that. And so talk about in that application, why with Bespin, you can now pull the capability development left by 1 to 2 years. And how does that also tie into that operational imperative? So with Bespin, deploying capability on the edge and to mobile devices, what, for those specific STRATFIs, what are you moving left? And what is the impact of that capability, right? You know that because you know what the specific topic is and where that mission impact is. And I know you have a background on how this all ties into the larger mission. So tell that narrative, be specific, and be direct about the impact it's going to have. Use numbers.
Perfect. Thank you so much, man. Really great answer.
Yeah, thanks, man. Good chatting. Happy to chat if you need anytime. All right. And then Alex, you said, will the slide deck be published after? Yes, it will. All right. Thanks to the team that stuck around for this last bit. If you have any more questions, we will put our contact info out when we reach out. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day. Bye, John.